The crystal goblet shattered against the marble floor. And for the first time in 3 centuries, Queen Elara of the Celestian Empire stood frozen, her violet eyes wide with an emotion she had forgotten existed, pure, unadulterated shock. Before her, in the grand throne room of the orbital palace, stood her daughter Lyra, and clutched in Lyra's trembling arms were 2 small children with silver hair and round, impossible ears, one pointed like their mother's, one rounded like their father's. Impossible, the queen whispered, her voice cracking like ancient ice. The doctors said, the genetic damage from the war. You cannot have children. But the evidence giggled and reached tiny hands toward the grandmother who had never expected to earn that title. And in that moment, the fate of 2 species shifted on its axis. 3 years earlier, Lyra had been nobody special. Just another young Celestian scientist assigned to the human colony on Keeper's Ridge, a barren mining planet where the air tasted like copper and hope came in short supply. She remembered stepping off the transport shuttle, her pointed ears twitching at the harsh wind, her government-issued tactical suit already covered in red dust, before she'd taken 10 steps. The humans had stared at her, of course they always did. Despite the treaties, despite the alliance, a Celestian in human territory still turned heads. She'd learned to ignore it, learned to bury herself in work, learned to accept that her life would be one of service and solitude, because that's what the doctors had told every Celestian woman of her generation. The radiation from the Void Wars corrupted your genetic line, they'd said, with clinical detachment. You'll live long, healthy lives, but you'll never bear children. Your line ends with you. She'd made peace with it, or so she thought, until she met Marcus Chen in the most undignified way possible by literally crashing into him while running diagnostics on the colony's failing water reclamation system. He'd caught her before she face-planted into a control panel, his hands steady and warm, and when she looked up into his dark brown eyes, she felt something she'd only read about in the forbidden human literature she secretly consumed, a spark. You okay? He'd asked, his voice rough from the dry air, but somehow gentle. I'm fine, she'd snapped, jerking away because she was a Celestian, and they were supposed to be composed, dignified, superior. But he'd just smiled, this infuriating, crooked smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle, and said, good, because I need your help. The whole sector's water system is shot, and I've been told you're the genius who can fix impossible things. She should have assigned someone else, should have maintained proper distance, should have remembered that humans and Celestians didn't mix beyond professional courtesy, not because it was forbidden, but because what was the point when her future held nothing but empty years? But she didn't. She worked alongside Marcus for 3 days straight in the cramped, sweltering maintenance tunnels. And somewhere between his terrible jokes about quantum mechanics and the way he really listened when she talked about her research, she forgot to guard her heart. Why do you do that? He asked on the 3rd night, when they were both exhausted and covered in grime, sitting on the floor sharing a ration pack because the cafeteria was closed. Do what? She asked, genuinely confused. Hide, he said simply. Every time you smile, you catch yourself. Every time you laugh, you stop halfway through. Like you're not allowed to be happy. The observation cut deeper than any blade. Maybe I'm not, she whispered, and before she could stop herself, the truth spilled out. The war, the radiation, the damage to her people's genetics, the emptiness that awaited her. She waited for pity, for awkwardness, for him to pull away. Instead, Marcus took her hand the first time anyone had touched her with such gentle intention in years and said something that would echo through every moment that followed. The future isn't written by what we can't do, Lyra. It's written by what we choose to do anyway. 6 months later, they were inseparable, though they kept it quiet. Relationships between species weren't forbidden, but they were complicated, especially when one species was slowly dying out despite their long lifespans. Lyra's superiors would have called it illogical. Marcus's friends called it brave. Lyra called it the first time she'd ever felt truly alive. She loved the way he hummed while working, how he remembered she hated the smell of synthetic coffee, how he looked at her, not as an alien or a curiosity, but as simply Lyra. She loved that he challenged her, made her laugh, held her when the nightmares about her dying species came. And she loved him despite knowing it would end in heartbreak, because humans live such brief, bright lives, and hers would stretch on long after his light went out. But then came the morning she woke up dizzy, nauseous, her body feeling strange in ways she couldn't explain. The colony medic, a gruff woman named Dr. Yates, had run the scans 3 times before calling Lyra into her office with a face that looked like she'd seen a ghost. "This is impossible, Doctor," Yates said, her hands shaking as she held the datapad. "According to these scans, you're pregnant." 10 weeks. Lyra's world tilted. "No, the tests." "The Celestian medical, I don't care what the tests said," Dr. Yates interrupted. "I'm looking at 2 heartbeats on this scan." "2, Lyra. You're having twins." The fear came first, sharp and cold. Then wonder. Then a terror so profound it stopped her breath, because if anyone found out, if her mother, the queen, found out, she didn't know what would happen. The Celestian Empire had strict protocols about genetic anomalies, about unplanned variables, about anything that might affect the careful, dying balance of their species. Marcus had cried when she told him, actual tears streaming down his face. And then he'd laughed and spun her around the tiny apartment they secretly shared, whispering promises against her hair. "We'll figure it out," he kept saying. "We'll keep them safe. I promise." They'd hidden the pregnancy, faking transfer requests so Lyra could stay on the remote colony where no one would report to the queen. Dr. Yates became their co-conspirator, falsifying medical records, creating a network of lies to protect the impossible children growing inside Lyra's body. And when the twins were born, a boy and a girl, perfect and beautiful and hybrid in every cell, Lyra understood for the first time what humans meant when they talked about love powerful enough to die for. She named them Kai and Arya. Kai had his father's eyes and his mother's pointed ears. Arya had her mother's silver hair and her father's rounded ears. Both had the luminescent skin of Celestians and the warm adaptability of humans. They were miracles, impossible proof that perhaps the Celestian species wasn't as doomed as everyone believed. For 2 years, they lived in secret happiness on Keeper's Ridge, a hidden family in the galaxy's forgotten corner. Marcus taught the children to laugh. Lyra taught them to wonder. They were building something precious and fragile, a future no one thought possible. But secrets in space have a way of unraveling. The Queen's intelligence network was vast. And when whispers reached the palace of a Celestian scientist who'd gone unusually reclusive, who'd stopped attending mandatory genetic monitoring sessions, whose biometric data showed anomalies, Queen Elara herself decided to investigate. Lyra had exactly 4 hours warning before the royal ship entered orbit. 4 hours to prepare for the moment that could either save or destroy everything. She could have run. Marcus begged her to. "We can take the children, disappear into human space, change our names." "No," Lyra said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm done hiding. If these children are proof that our species can survive, then my mother needs to see them. The Empire needs to know." So she'd dressed Kai and Arya in their best clothes, explained in simple terms that they were going to meet someone very important, and walked into the throne room with her head high and her children's hands in hers, ready to face a queen who had never been defied. And now, in the terrible silence after the shattered goblet, Queen Elara descended from her throne with slow, measured steps. She was ancient by human standards, nearly 400 years old, but she moved with deadly grace, her silver hair flowing like water, her face carved from marble and authority. The royal guards tensed, hands moving to weapons. Marcus, standing behind Lyra, stepped forward protectively. But the queen's eyes were locked on the children, on Kai, who hid halfway behind his mother's leg, and Arya, who stared back with fearless curiosity. "Come here, child," the queen said softly, and Arya, because she'd inherited her father's dangerous courage, walked forward. The throne room was so silent, Lyra could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of history balancing on the edge of a knife. Queen Elara knelt, the queen, who knelt for no one, and studied Arya's face with an expression Lyra had never seen on her mother's face, wonder mixed with something that looked almost like pain. "She has your grandmother's eyes," the queen whispered. "My mother's eyes, before the war took her." Arya reached out and touched the queen's cheek with chubby, fearless fingers. "Why are you sad?" she asked in her clear, small voice. The queen's breath caught. When she spoke again, her voice was raw. "Because I thought I would never see those eyes again. I thought our family, our people, would fade into memory and dust." She looked up at Lyra, and for the first time in decades, there were tears on the queen's face. "How?" Lyra knelt beside her mother, and the words tumbled out. "The unexpected pregnancy. The hybrid genetics somehow bypassing the radiation damage." Dr. Yates's theories about human DNA acting as a repair mechanism for corrupted Celestian genes, the 2 years of hiding and fear and hope. I know I've broken protocols, Lyra said, her voice shaking. I know this complicates everything. But Mother, they're healthy. They're brilliant. They're proof that maybe we don't have to fade away. Queen Elara stood, pulling Lyra up with her, and then did something unprecedented. She embraced her daughter, truly embraced her, with Arya squeezed between them and Kai rushing over to join because he hated being left out. You gave me back hope, the queen said, against Lyra's hair. Do you understand? You gave our entire species back a future. Marcus cleared his throat awkwardly. Your Majesty, I know I'm just a human, and I have no claim to you, the queen interrupted, fixing him with a stare that could cut steel. Are the father of my grandchildren. That gives you every claim. She crossed to him, and Marcus stood straighter, clearly preparing for judgment or worse. Instead, the queen took his hand in both of hers, a gesture of respect between equals. You've done what our greatest scientists couldn't. You've saved a dying species. How can I repay such a debt? I didn't do it to save a species, Marcus said quietly, glancing at Lyra. I did it because I love her. That's all. The queen studied him for a long moment, then smiled a real smile, not the political mask she wore for councils and ceremonies. Then you're exactly what she needs. What we all need. The following weeks transformed the empire. The queen's personal scientists descended on Keeper's Ridge, studying the twins with reverent care, unraveling the mystery of how hybrid genetics had accomplished what decades of research couldn't. The answer was beautiful in its complexity. Human genetic diversity, evolved to survive countless planetary conditions, acted as a template that could rebuild damaged Celestian DNA. The children weren't just hybrids. They were bridges between species, proof that survival sometimes came from unexpected unity. The queen made an announcement that shook both human and Celestian space. The Empire was formally opening genetic partnership programs, encouraging unions between species, offering resources and support for mixed families. Lyra found herself thrust into the spotlight as her children became symbols of hope, tiny ambassadors of a possible future. She hated the attention, but loved watching Kai and Arya play in the palace gardens with other hybrid children who began to appear as more Celestian women dared to hope, dared to love beyond species lines. Marcus adapted to palace life with bemused grace, charming the stiff Celestian court with his humanity and his unwavering devotion to his family. The queen developed a surprising fondness for her son-in-law, often seeking his perspective on matters of human relations. You see the galaxy differently than we do, she told him once. You see possibilities where we see limitations. Your species' short lives make you brave in ways we've forgotten. But the most profound change was in Lyra herself. She'd spent her whole life being told she was broken, that her future was empty, that her purpose was service to a dying cause. Now she stood in the royal gardens, watching her mother, the fearsome queen, on her hands and knees with Kai and Arya, teaching them the ancient Celestian game of star weaving, her laughter echoing off the crystal columns. Marcus slipped his arm around Lyra's waist, and she leaned into his warmth. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Falling in love with an alien who came with this much complications. He kissed her temple. Every choice has complications, Lyra. The question is whether the complications are worth it. He gestured to their children, to the queen's joy, to the hope spreading across an empire. I think we did okay. That night, after the children were asleep and the palace had quieted, Queen Elara summoned Lyra to the private observatory where they'd stargazed when Lyra was young, before duty and destiny had created distance between them. I'm sorry, the queen said without preamble, staring out at the swirling nebula beyond the windows. I let fear make me cold. I let loss make me forget how to hope. You paid the price for that. You were trying to protect our people, Lyra said. I was trying to control what couldn't be controlled, the queen corrected. I was so focused on preserving what we were that I couldn't see what we might become. She turned to Lyra, taking her daughter's hands. You were braver than I ever was. You chose love over fear, hope over certainty. You gave me grandchildren I never expected and a future I'd stopped believing in. Thank you, my daughter. They held each other, and Lyra felt something broken inside her finally heal, a wound she hadn't fully acknowledged until it began to close. The future spread before them, uncertain and bright, written not in the stars, but in the choices of people brave enough to love across boundaries. 6 months later, Lyra stood in the newly established Institute of Hybrid Studies, a research facility dedicated to understanding and supporting the growing population of human Celestian children. She was the director, finally using her scientific expertise for something that filled her with purpose. Marcus Coe led the Human Outreach Program, building bridges between colonies. And in the Institute's central garden, visible from every floor, stood a statue commissioned by the Queen, a Celestian woman and a human man, hands joined, looking toward the horizon, with 2 children playing at their feet. The plaque read simply, "The future isn't written by what we can't do. It's written by what we choose to do anyway." Sometimes during quiet moments, Lyra thought about that day in the throne room, the goblet shattering, her mother's face frozen in shock and wonder. She thought about all the fear she'd carried, all the hiding, all the impossible odds they'd overcome. And she thought about the simple, revolutionary truth she'd learned, that love, whether between species or within families, had the power to rewrite destinies that seemed carved in stone. Kai and Arya were 3 now, already showing signs of remarkable abilities. Kai had his mother's scientific mind and his father's problem-solving creativity, while Arya possessed an empathic sense that seemed to blend Celestian intuition with human emotional intelligence. They were the first, but no longer alone. Across the Empire, hybrid children laughed and grew. Proof that endings could become beginnings, that broken didn't mean finished, that the impossible was just the word people used before someone dared to try anyway. And Queen Elara, ancient and powerful and transformed by unexpected grandmotherhood, had discovered that the greatest legacy wasn't preserving the past, but nurturing a future she'd never imagined. She visited the children weekly, teaching them Celestian history and learning human games, in return, building memories she'd treasure across the centuries still ahead of her. The galaxy moved on, as it always did, but for one family divided by species, united by love, the impossible had become simply life, messy and beautiful and worth every complicated moment.